Hello, and welcome to another video from 3.5 Archive. Today we're going to be doing another class review. We're going to be looking at the Knight from the Player's Handbook 2. And the Knight is a little bit of a cross between the Fighter and the Paladin. You don't have any sort of divine power or anything like that, but rather you are fueled by your own steadfast will and your code of honor that drives you on to take on various challenges for both self-betterment and potentially for your honor and that of your lord that you serve, or just the general greater good, or greater evil, depending. So a knight is an interesting way of putting a little bit more of a medieval feel into D&D, which, while it is, considered to be a medieval setting, oftentimes it's really more of a Wild West sort of setting that has a coat of medieval paint slapped over it. Regardless of how you want to incorporate the knight into your world, the Knight is interesting because it is one of the first steps toward the 4th edition archetypes of combat that were created, where they have the defender, the striker, the controller, and the leader. And these different, combat roles are how the different classes were divided up. So the Knight fits in here as a defender, and we'll be able to see that the designers take the first few steps toward that archetype with this class. Now the Knight gives you a d12 hit die and a full base attack bonus. It also gives you a good will save, which is a little bit unusual for a fighter type. Usually they don't have good will saves. Usually they have good fortitude saves. A good will save is great because oftentimes failing a will save is a fighting character's weakest point, and having a good will save helps prevent that, of course. Not having a good fortitude save, though, is a big problem, and it really doesn't make sense. And as we'll see as we go through this class, there's really no reason why the Knight could not have a good fortitude save as well. If you look at it from another perspective, a cleric has a good fortitude and good will save, and it is a far more powerful class than the Knight class can hope to be. But moving past that, the Knight is based around the Knight's Challenge feature that forms sort of the core of the class. And this is a feature that you can use a number of times per day equal to half your class level plus your charisma bonus. So you're going to want to have a good charisma, as this class suggests in the abilities section. It also suggests you have a high constitution, and it mentions constitution before it mentions strength. So that's a little bit of a clue that this is meant to be a defender type character. It's more important that you can take a hit than be able to hit back quite as hard. And the d12 hit die, of course, also plays into this. But back to the Knight's Challenge feature, you can use it a number of times per day equal to half your class level plus your charisma bonus, at the very least once per day. And as you gain levels, you're going to gain different ways to use it. And the first way you gain to use it is your fighting challenge. This is something you can do as a swift action. You can challenge a particular opponent, and they have to have an intelligence score of 5 or higher, a language of some sort, and their challenge rating must be greater than or equal to your character level minus 2. So their challenge rating must be within 2 of your levels. So you can't be a 6th level knight using this against, average gnolls. And this works out okay for the fighting challenge. It fits thematically, but as we'll see later on, that causes a little bit of an issue for some of the other abilities that come under the Knight's Challenge that also fit this weird sort of set of requirements. But anyway, with the fighting challenge, you're going to get a +1 on will saves and a +1 on attack and damage rolls. These are all going to be morale bonuses, so if you do have a bard in the party, this isn't going to stack with Inspire Courage, which is a bit unfortunate. However, the comparison to the bard's Inspire Courage is quite apt because this bonus scales at a pretty similar rate to the bard's Inspire Courage. At level 7 it goes to +2, at level 13 it goes to +3, and at level 19 it goes to +4. Now the fighting challenge is pretty nice. It does give you a little bit of a bonus against a particular enemy. If they run away, you can use another use of your Knight's Challenge to switch it to a new target. And it's similar to the marking mechanic that comes up in 4th edition, where you would choose a particular enemy and get bonuses against them. So this is a bit of a design precursor to that. And the Player's Handbook 2 came out relatively late in the 3.5 release schedule. It was at least late enough to be using the new stat block format. So the other thing you get at level 1 is going to be the Knight's Code. This isn't really a feature, this is more of a restriction. And these are, your code of honor that you have to stick by as you go out through your adventuring career. You are not allowed to take a flanking bonus. You can give one to your ally, but you can't use that +2 yourself, which hurts a little bit because that means that you won't be able to get that little +2, or with power attack turn it into +4 damage if you're using a two-handed sword. And you also can't strike a flat-footed opponent. And this means that you can't just, treat a flat-footed opponent as if they were not flat-footed. No, this means that you just can't attack them. So you won't be able to attack during a surprise round. You also can't do lethal damage against a helpless foe, but you can do non-lethal damage. So for the most part, this won't really be much of an issue, at least that part. The Knight's Code isn't going to be devastating to your character, but it is going to be a little bit of a drawback. You will notice it from time to time. But that sort of makes sense. It fits thematically, and it's a good drawback for the class, although we're going to see whether or not the Knight is able to make up for that drawback in the features it gives you. At level 2, you're going to get Mounted Combat as a bonus feat. This is really just there to feed into the image of the Knight, into the theme of the Knight, as a mounted character, even though you're probably not going to be able to take your mount in the dungeon. And you're also going to get Shield Block +1. And this works pretty much like the dodge feat, except you need to have a shield for it, and it's a shield bonus. You pick one opponent, and you get to add +1 to your armor class against them. And this is going to improve to a +2 at level 11 and a +3 at level 20. This is a nice little boost to your armor class. It's really not the greatest feature, but it is something to add on. It's a little bit of a pain to keep track of. It would have almost been nice if this just gave you more of a bonus to your armor class when using a shield. That would have been maybe even a little bit more compelling. Being able to just write something down on your armor class as a bonus is usually more helpful than having to assign it and have some floating modifier to deal with. And that's part of why the dodge feat isn't good. The other part, of course, being that you're only getting that bonus against one enemy target. You could, of course, take the dodge feat alongside this and get even more bonuses to armor class against particular targets, but it's really not worth it. And it's a decent feature, but it's really not all that spectacular. At level 3, you get Bulwark of Defense, and this lets you treat any square around you as difficult terrain for creatures that start their turn adjacent to you. So somebody that wants to, move past you, not only do they have to deal with an attack of opportunity, but they also have to deal with moving half speed. Now this kind of plays into the Defender archetype, where they're meant to stop or hinder enemies from getting close to their allies. And this is a pretty mediocre way of going about it. And it's one of those things where, actually, by the way that it is worded, it does allow you to do it with any squares you threaten. So you can use a reach weapon, but even so, you're not going to be able to affect that large of an area. And it's not going to be like some things in later editions of the game where you can actually stop an opponent moving past you if you hit them with an opportunity attack and physically prevent them from getting closer to your allies. There are other features that are a little bit better for this later on, but this is not a good start for the Defender archetype that this Knight is trying to play into. At level 4, we get a nice quality of life feature, we could call it. We're going to get Armor Mastery Medium, and this lets you retain your normal base movement speed while you're wearing medium armor. So instead of having to move 20 feet, you're going to get to move a full 30 feet while wearing medium armor. Of course, by this point, you're probably going to be wearing heavy armor already. Usually a fighting character can afford full plate by level 3 if you're going by the normal player character wealth. So this is a little bit late for that. So you're probably not going to get to actually use this feature until level 9 when you get Armor Mastery Heavy, which is going to let you move around in full plate at a full 30-foot speed. And while this isn't the greatest feature in the world, this is one of the more attractive features of the class, actually, because it is quite painful to have to deal with that 20-foot move speed until you're able to get Mithril Plate or something like that. And that's another side of this, is that this class feature could be replaced simply by spending another few thousand gold on Mithril armor instead of regular armor. But that is going to save you a little bit of gold at least, so that is nice to be able to save, although you might want it anyway. You're also going to get Test of Metal, and this is where the Defender archetype is again attempted, and it lets you affect all creatures within 100 feet as a swift action, although they need to have challenge rating within 2 of your level. And any creatures that fail a will save equal to 10 plus half your level plus your charisma modifier are going to be forced to attack you in preference of anyone else. So this lets you draw enemy fire. Enemies are going to have to come after you, but here's the problem with this, is that if it only applies to creatures whose challenge rating is close to your character level, then if you're fighting a whole bunch of orcs, then you're not going to be able to draw them to you, and they can simply just run past you and start hacking away at the wizard regardless. And while this doesn't come up very often, and usually you don't fight very low-level opponents, I will say in my own experience at least, a lot of D&D campaigns still involve characters fighting low-level minion-type characters, minion-type enemies at higher levels. It's not uncommon for a level 6 or 7 party to fight dozens of orcs as a sort of send-off to those lower-level enemies before you move on to greater things. And not being able to use this ability in that situation kind of hurts, and it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. You would think that you would be able to taunt those foes into attacking you, or kind of, challenge them into testing their mettle against your own. Just because they're lower level than you doesn't really necessarily mean that they would, not want to attack you. Maybe they're intimidated by you, perhaps. But either way, that's a little bit of a disappointment for this feature. But otherwise, it's a decent way to, draw attacks. Although oftentimes if you're up front, then your enemies are going to attack you anyway. So sometimes it's just sort of useless. At level 5, you're going to get a bonus feat. And this bonus feat's going to be restricted to a pretty short list. A lot of them are pretty useless feats. You can get Iron Will if you want to buff your will save a bit more. You can get Great Fortitude if you want to make up for not having a good Fortitude save. You are going to get access to the various mounted combat related feats, but the fact that we're even bringing these feats up just shows how sparse the list is. Animal Affinity, Die Hard, Endurance, Great Fortitude, Iron Will, Quick Draw, Ride by Attack, Spirited Charge, Trample, or Weapon Focus Lance. And you still have to meet the prerequisites for these feats. You're going to get a bonus feat at 5th level, 10th level, and 15th level. And honestly, it really doesn't matter what you choose. You might as well pick some of those mounted feats for your wilderness encounters, because that's all the use you're going to get out of them. This really doesn't help your fighting ability in any way. You shouldn't even have to be taking Great Fortitude, because this class really should just give you a good Fortitude save to start. You're also going to get the Vigilant Defender feature, and this is going to be an extension of that Bulwark of Defense feature. This is going to increase the DC to tumble either through a threatened square or through your square by your class level. So if somebody wants to tumble past you as a 5th level knight, then they're going to have to make a DC 20 tumble check instead of a DC 15. And this feature just isn't going to come up that much, unfortunately, because it's going to be pretty rare in most campaigns for an opponent to try to tumble past you. It will happen sometimes, but the simple fact of the matter is that this is the sort of feature that is there, and if it wasn't at the same level as a very mediocre bonus feat, then it maybe would be a little bit less painful, but level 5 really isn't very exciting for you here. This is a very reactive, very situational feature, and the former is okay, but the latter really isn't. You're not going to get to use this very much, although it will be nice to make tumbling through your square very difficult. Although odds are a high-level rogue with a good tumble check will still have a good chance of getting past you. At level 6, you're going to get Shield Ally. And this is going to allow you to use an immediate action to absorb part of the damage dealt to an adjacent ally. So whenever a physical attack hits an adjacent ally, you can use your immediate action to take half that damage onto yourself. This is a pretty nice feature, although you do have to use up your immediate action, so this can only happen once. So hopefully it's an all-in-one big attack that your ally's taking this damage and not spread out over multiple. Even so, it is good to be able to defend an ally like this. You're going to have a D12 hit die and good constitution, so if you do end up standing next to the wizard, then you're going to be able to protect them from attacks. However, a wizard that you're protecting like this is going to be doing a pretty bad job as a wizard, so you're more likely going to be sheltering the party rogue or scout or whatever by using this ability. Which means you probably won't be on the other side giving them flanking. So this feature, while somewhat nice, requiring you to be adjacent is a little bit annoying. And D&D 3.5 really isn't the type of game that would allow you to move as part of an immediate reaction. So it's understandable that this isn't going to be something that you can run around the battlefield with. But it's just a pretty disappointing feature because it requires so much setup. It makes sense, but again, it's a disappointment to have to go through all that for what can be replicated by a 2nd level spell. At level 8, you're going to get Call to Battle, and this is going to let you use a swift action to expend one of your knight's challenge ability uses to grant an ally another save against a fear effect, and they get a bonus on the save equal to your charisma bonus. This can be nice against a dragon's frightful presence, or as the example shows, a Lich's fear spell, but fear effects, while they are very devastating, they don't come up all that often. And while this is a really great feature when it does matter, because having somebody have to sit out of the combat can both end up with your party potentially getting killed, and it's also not at all very fun to have to sit out for the combat for that long. So this can also be helping the fun of your fellow players. It really isn't that great of a feature. If it was something that could snap somebody out of a mind-affecting ability, while that really doesn't quite fit the flavor of the feature, it would make it a lot more versatile. As is, it's mediocre, and as your only 8th level feature, it's again another situational reactive feature that just isn't going to come up enough for it to be worth considering, part of the class, a good part of the class. At level 9, you're going to get Armor Mastery Heavy, so you can finally move around in full plate without any speed restriction. At level 10, you get another bonus feat. At level 11, your shield block improves to +2. And at level 12, you're going to gain Daunting Challenge. And this allows you to, as a swift action, expend a use of your Knight's Challenge to affect all creatures within 100 feet of you that have a challenge rating within 2 of your level. And they have to be able to have a language and have 5 or more intelligence, which is usually the case, but if you're fighting a bestial monster, a mindless undead, or vermin, then this ability is not going to work at all. But any targets that do meet these conditions are going to have to make will saves or become shaken. And this is pretty excellent, because if you have some other ability that lets you make somebody shaken, then this can potentially let you do some fear stacking and potentially make opponents frightened of you or panicked, and they might run away, and that can be some extremely effective crowd control. This is one of the more effective uses of the Knight's Challenge so far, but it's still not the greatest thing because it's coming at such a late level, and there's not a lot of ways to boost the ability, and it's unclear whether or not you can use ability focus for your entire Knight's Challenge feature, or if you need to apply it to the sub-features individually. Probably the former, but who knows. At level 13, you're going to get +3 Fighting Challenge, which is going to be a nice improvement, but again, if you have a bard in the party, it's going to be overlapping with that. At level 14, you're going to get Improved Shield Ally, and this is going to be an improvement on your shield ally, where once per round, in addition to taking half damage with immediate action, you can absorb all the damage from a single attack against an adjacent ally. And you're going to continue to absorb half the damage on all the other physical attacks. Well, that's nice to be able to take all of that damage, but again, you still do need to be adjacent to them, and oftentimes that's going to be either impractical or is just going to require more setup and giving up other things like granting flanking. At level 15, you get another bonus feat. At level 16, you get Bond of Loyalty. You can expend a use of your Knight's Challenge to make an additional saving throw against a mind-affecting spell or ability. You can use it once around as a free action and can continue to use it even if you're under the effect of one. So if you're making, ongoing saves to break out of a mind-affecting effect, then you can continue to give up uses of this to make extra attempts to break free. You already have a good will save, so odds are you're not going to fall prey to these effects in the first place, but this is still nice, and it's really important to help you break out of things like, hold person and the like. At level 17, you're going to get Impetuous Endurance, and this is going to mean that you no longer automatically fail a saving throw in a result of 1, which is nice, but it's not going to come up all that often. It's only going to come up 1 out of every 20 saving throws. And usually if you roll a 1, you're still going to be failing the saving throw. This might be nice if you're up against drow elves who are just shooting you with poison darts all day long and waiting for you to roll a natural 1 on your fortitude save. But aside from that, it's a nice feature. It sounds a lot better than it is. At level 19, your Fighting Challenge goes up to +4, and at level 20, your Shield Block goes up to +3. And you also get your final ability from the Knight's Challenge, which is Loyal Beyond Death. And this allows you to expend 1 use of your Knight's Challenge ability when you are at -10 hit points or lower, or at 0 hit points or lower, to continue fighting. If your body's destroyed by something like Disintegrate, then you can't act, but you can continue to fight, potentially if you were fresh, for 12 rounds while you were, possibly in the negative hundreds of hit points. And if you're healed up before your uses of this ability run out, then you're just fine. And otherwise you just die if you don't get healing before then. But the fact that this allows you to stay alive even at vast negative amounts of hit points can be really nice. And while this won't protect you maybe from death effects or anything, that's not going to come up that often. Odds are if you're getting killed is from getting knocked to way below -10, especially at higher levels where 50 or more damage being tossed around in one attack isn't that unusual. So this is actually a very good feature. It'll help your survivability. Dying at higher levels isn't that bad. It becomes pretty much just a minor inconvenience after a point, but it's still good to avoid if you can. And using up a free daily ability instead of tens of thousands of gold of diamond dust is a all-in-all good trade-off. So what should we think about the Knight class? Well, it's an attempt at a defender archetype, and what it gives you is difficult terrain around you if you're using a reach weapon. It increases the difficulty to tumble past you. It allows you to stand next to allies and absorb some of their damage, and it allows you to make enemies shaken. It allows you to force them to attack you potentially, although not at the same time. And this is a all-in-all kind of a bit of a mess of defender abilities. On one hand, it will make them attack you. On the other hand, it will stop them from moving past you to attack your allies. On another hand, it will let you stand next to your allies if they are already being attacked and stop them from taking damage. Nothing here necessarily synergizes, but they all do feed into the same general theme. The issue is that a lot of these features are reactive. You need your enemy to do a particular thing before you can use the feature. Being able to, move up and hit an opponent and stop them from moving with the immobilized condition that was introduced late in D&D 3.5 would be nice, although it might not really fit the 3.5 game design aesthetic that well. Overall, this is a class that really suffers from not doing any one particular thing very well. You do get that nice fighting challenge bonus that you can switch from target to target, but you can easily replicate that bonus to attacks and damage with the fighter-only feats like weapon specialization, greater weapon focus, greater weapon specialization, melee weapon mastery, and that sort of thing will help you get static bonuses to damage that always apply and aren't morale bonuses. So the fact that you miss out on those fighter bonus feats really goes to show how mediocre this class is. The armor mastery feature is nice, but again, it can be replaced by mithril armor that you might want to get anyway. The bonus feats are a very limited selection. The shield block is pretty mediocre and can be replaced by, and to some degree, by bonus feats, although not quite. Overall, it's really hard to justify playing this over a fighter. You can even replicate the test of metal by taking the goad feat and just having a 13 or better charisma. And you're going to need the same ability scores to play a knight as you would a fighter with the addition of needing charisma. It's not quite as bad as paladin that needs wisdom as well, but it is still a fairly multi-ability dependent class, and that means you're going to be stretched thin. If we look at the back of the book where they have an appendix for quick player character, non-player character creation, we can see the suggested ability score array for a knight is going to be assigning a 15 strength, 12 dexterity, 13 constitution, 10 intelligence, 8 wisdom, and 14 charisma. So they're sort of breaking their own rule on how they prioritize the ability scores in the class description, but that's fine, and you can afford to have a 13 constitution when you have a bigger hit die, but even so, you're not going to be having an excellent, ability score in any one particular place here. You're going to have to keep up with your charisma if you want to make the DC for your will saves to draw fire to you any good. You're going to want to improve your strength to improve your hitting power. And if you're going to be shielding allies, you're going to need a great constitution to be able to soak up all those blows. So the knight really suffers not only from having to depend on multiple ability scores, but from really needing all those ability scores to be excellent. And as a result, it's really difficult to play a knight character. You're going to be behind a fighter in a lot of ways, and you're going to be relying on features that you essentially gave up having bonus feats as a fighter for in order to, actually make use of your class identity and actually fulfill it in some way. How many levels should you take in Knight? Well, arguably none at all. But if you are going to take some, it might be good to at least take 4 levels to get that test of metal. It is technically better than goad, and unfortunately your DC is not going to scale if you multi-class, but it will at least be something there for you to use. If you go to level 6, you can get Shield Ally, which is somewhat helpful. The call to battle feature is nice, but it's really difficult to choose a particular number of levels to take in this class because there's really no feature that you're really going for to grab, except for maybe the daunting challenge at level 12, but that's a huge investment just to try to go into a fear stacking build where you try to have opponents be shaken from multiple sources so they can become frightened and panicked, and that really is not a viable way to go about it. There's much easier ways to make such a character. So really the knight does not have a lot to offer. In fact, it's more important to question how many levels of fighter that you would want to take and give up levels of knight. But that's going to prevent you from getting to the Loyal Beyond Death feature by level 20, which is something you're really going to want, and one of the few perks of playing in high level knight. Overall, the knight's got a lot of nice little features that are good to have in some situations, and sometimes you'll be really grateful that you had them. But for the most part, it's hard to be proactive with this class like you can be with a fighter. You can build a lot of things that will affect your damage as a fighter. There's a variety of different feats that you can put on to affect your attacks and do different things with them. Even with how mediocre improved trip and improved disarm and that sort of thing can feel like in 3.5, it's still better than a lot of what the knight is offering here, because you can at least deploy those tactics when you choose to, rather than waiting for your opponent to do something or put you in a situation where using these features would be advantageous. So that'll be about it for this D&D 3.5 class review. Please like, share, comment, subscribe, and so on. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time here on 3.5 Archive.